But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to Alastair Stewart and Friends. I'm Dominic Frisby, sitting in for Alastair. And for the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter all over the country. And there's plenty coming up this afternoon throughout the programme. We'll be keeping you up to date with the latest developments in Ukraine. We'll be crossing live to those on the ground in Ukraine as the unrest mounts, all that to come. But first, it's the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Dominic, thank you. It's 12 o'clock in the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian president says the country is controlling Kyiv, but has urged people to come and help fight. Britain's defence ministry reports the bulk of Russian forces are 19 miles away from the centre of the capital. Gunfire and explosions have been heard throughout the capital, and fighting has broken out on the streets as Russia's invasion reaches its third day. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 120,000 Ukrainian refugees have fled the country. In a social media post, President Volodymyr Zelensky has reassured Ukrainians that he would not be leaving Kyiv, saying the fight is here.
Lately, there has been a lot of fake information online that I am calling on our army to lay down arms and to evacuate. Listen, I am here. We will not lay down the weapons. We will defend our state, because our weapon is our truth. And the truth is that this is our land, our country, our children. And we will defend all of that.
NATO leaders, including the UK and US, have agreed to give more weapons, medical supplies and military aid to Ukraine. NATO are also deploying significantly more troops to Eastern Europe to bolster its defences. US President Joe Biden will provide up to £450 million to fund immediate aid and military training. Labour MP Stephen Kinnock told GB News that if Russia attacks a NATO member country, that would be an attack on all of NATO.
So much as considered putting a single military boot on the ground into any of those NATO countries, then the consequences for him will be swift and they will be catastrophic. And that is what I think we have to make absolutely clear to him now, whilst doing everything we can to arm the resistance in Ukraine so that we stand with our friends and partners and allies against this tyrant and gangster that Mr. Putin really is.
Well, Oj Chatterjee is a conflict journalist who is currently in Kyiv. He says that Europe doesn't quite realise the scale of the humanitarian crisis that the invasion has caused.
It started getting closer and closer and closer to us, and we started hearing small arms fire, inaudible distance. It was a difficult night. There's very little choice many of the people have here. They're currently, many of them are staying in underground stations, using them as bomb shelters, and understandably a lot of people here are very scared.
Oz Chatterjee speaking there. Well, meanwhile, a Russian cargo ship has been seized in the English Channel. French sea police seized the ship, which French authorities believe belongs to a Russian company suspected of breaching trade sanctions linked to the war in Ukraine. The Russian embassy in France is seeking explanations from the French authorities over the seizure. The UK, US, Canada and the European Union have announced plans to impose rare personal sanctions on President Vladimir Putin and his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. At a resolution meeting in New York last night, the United Nations Security Council failed to pass a motion that would call on Moscow to cease fire and withdraw its troops because it was vetoed by Russia. China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstained from the vote. Facebook is banning Russian state media from advertising or monetising on its platform anywhere in the world amid its invasion of Ukraine. In response, Russian authorities announced a partial restriction of access to Facebook in the country. But Nick Clegg, the Vice President of Global Affairs at Facebook's parent company Meta, says Russian citizens are using the company's apps to organise for action and encourage them to continue to make their voices heard. In other news now, people eligible for an energy rebate payment are being told they can get it quicker if they set up a direct debit to pay their council tax. The Local Government Association says if they don't, it could take longer to get their money back. That's £150, because checks will need to be carried out on each household. It follows the government announcement of a support package to help households with rising living costs in England. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, straight back to Dominic.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. I'm Dominic Frisby. I'm standing in for Alastair Stewart today, and until 2 p.m, I'll be keeping you company. And coming up on the show this afternoon, protests are taking place across the world in support of Ukraine, and we'll be crossing to London and Germany to see the anti-war protests which are taking place. Plus, Wales First Minister Mark Drakeford says that Wales has a part to play in helping Ukrainian refugees who are attempting to escape from their lives. And we'll go over to Cardiff to speak to our Wales reporter. And we'll be getting on-the-ground coverage from journalists and residents in Kyiv. That's coming up. As always, keep your thoughts coming in. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. And before we get into today's show, let's get the latest on Ukraine with our Home and Security Editor, Mark White.
Good afternoon, Dominic. Yes, indeed, events again as we are now well into the third day of this invasion by Russia on Ukrainian soil is fast moving. Many cities across Ukraine are at the centre of fights, either inside cities or on the outskirts of cities, and of course hundreds of sites, critical national infrastructure sites, military sites have been under bombardment from Russian forces, either missile bombardment or shelling. We are getting reports from the Ukrainian military that and the Ukrainian government that about just under 200 civilians have died, including some children. You have been looking at pictures including apartment blocks in the centre of the capital, Kyiv. Now, that was the subject of a missile strike earlier today, according to the Ukrainian authorities. The Russians, for their part, have denied that they are deliberately attacking residential areas. In fact, what they say is that this was an air defence missile, a Ukrainian air defence missile that had gone astray, denied completely by the Ukrainians. They say that there are multiple areas, multiple residential areas and cities right across the country that have been the subject of attacks by the Russian military. Now, James Heappey, who is the British Armed Forces Minister, has been speaking this morning as well about what more Britain and other NATO allies can do to help bolster the security and defences of Ukraine. It isn't a lot in terms of there will certainly be no NATO boots on the ground in that country, but what he has promised, along with 26 other NATO allies, is more weaponry. In recent weeks, the British and the US in particular have stepped up their arming of the Ukrainian military with the likes of shoulder-launched anti-air and anti-tank missiles. Now, according to James Heapy, they have been used to good effect in Ukraine already, having, according to the Ukrainian government, shot down a number of aircraft and also disabled a number of Russian tanks. Well, NATO is determined to send more weaponry, despite the difficulties, clearly, of getting that weaponry into Ukraine at the moment. They are going to send more weaponry, they say, in the coming days and weeks across to Ukraine to help. President Zelensky has made a very public appeal for as much in the way of assistance as he can get, clearly weaponry, ammunition, and this morning appealing directly to anyone who is a friend of Ukraine to come to that country, to be armed, to take up the fight. Now, this is not appealing for NATO military assistance in terms of boots on the ground, because he knows he's not going to get that, but he is appealing directly to civilian fighters, if you like, people maybe that have experience in the armed forces at some time in their own countries, to head across to Ukraine, where they will be armed and put in harm's way in the defence of Ukraine. So, Dominic, really, again, a day of fast-moving events. James Heapy, the Armed Forces Minister, saying that Russian advances are not of the timescale and timetable that initially was envisaged by the Russian President Vladimir Putin, that they have failed to meet many of their day one objectives, never mind day three, with many cities in Ukraine still not under the control of Russian forces.
Thank you, Mark. Hello and welcome to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Now, the more discerning amongst you might have noticed that I am not actually Alastair Stewart. My name's Dominic Frisby. I usually present the late night show Headliners when comedians review the papers. And I'm standing in for Alastair today and tomorrow while he takes some no doubt well-deserved time off. And no prizes for guessing what is going to be the focus of the show today. I'm going to be joined by Konstantin Kissin, who is host of TriggerPod, one of the UK's most popular podcasts, and conveniently, Konstantin is also Russian, so he'll be sharing his insights. And also with us is political journalist Benedict Spence, who is an expert in things Russian. So welcome both of you to the programme. And Konstantin, I'll start with you, if that's OK, while Benedict catches his breath. I know he's just rushed in at the last minute. Most of the media, I mean, the border forces have been on the border for almost a year now, and most of the media were going, he's not going to do it. But you were one of the few people who were going, actually, he is going to do it. He is going to invade. What led you to think that?
Well, I listened to Vladimir Putin, and that is exactly what he said was going to happen. I don't understand why people in the Western media have got this so badly wrong. All you had to do is listen to the speech that he gave a few days ago before the invasion, in which he explained everything that was going to happen and why it was going to happen. That's
really interesting, because I suppose my instinct when I listen to politicians is to believe the total opposite of what they say. But I guess in the case of Putin, he does what he says, or has he got previous?
Well, I'm not suggesting that everything he said in that speech was accurate. What I'm suggesting is if you'd listened to that speech, which I don't think anyone in the Western media did properly, then you would have heard in what he said the seeds of what was about to come. Because if you allow me a few seconds to explain, Dominic, the first thing he said is Ukraine has no right to exist. It's a historical mistake, that the result of a series of decisions made by weak Soviet leaders who created a country out of thin air, splitting the Russian nation apart and gluing a piece of what is old Russian territory to pieces of Poland and Hungary. Now, if you understand the geography of Ukraine, that immediately told you this was never going to stop in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Lugansk, because the Russian-speaking part of Ukraine that he's referring to is all the way up to Kyiv, the capital, which is halfway there in the country, and probably beyond. So this was always going to be a full-scale invasion.
Can I just stop you and ask you a very quick question there? This is Putin's view of what the Ukraine should be. Do Is this a majority view held across Russia, and do Ukrainians feel the same way, or is this just a point of view?
It's a very complicated issue that involves understanding centuries and centuries and centuries of history. He actually, it's an extraordinary speech that he gives. We would never hear one of our politicians giving a speech like this, because he talks for an hour and he spends the first 40 minutes of the speech talking about history from hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
And is his knowledge of history good?
Look, I'm not a historian. It's for other people to make that judgment. I think there are many things in that part of the speech that he said that are inaccurate. I think there are some parts in that part of the speech that are accurate. The question I think that we should be asking ourselves is, whatever the history of the state, does that enable and allow a country to invade its neighbour because it has some kind of historical claim? Should we here in England be thinking about recapturing Calais?
Well, I'm looking at the northwest coast of France and thinking, history, you know.
Quite. So that's only the first part. The second part is he explained that essentially the Russian people who live in Ukraine are being genocided, and I'm not exaggerating. That is the word that he used. Again, you haven't seen that reported in Western media with anything like the level of...
Are they?
Well, of course not.
Okay.
I have family in those parts of the country. I think if they were being genocided, I probably would have found out about it by now. So that was the second part. And the third part, again, completely unreported in Western media. And I want people to understand this. This is not about Ukraine. Vladimir Putin spends the last 20 minutes of that speech explaining that NATO is not a defensive alliance. NATO is moving missiles close to the borders of Russia. NATO is getting ready, essentially, to put itself into a position to strike at Russia. That is what he's saying. It's a distinctly Cold War speech. He has launched Cold War II, and that is where we are. So when people in the West, and I know I've been talking for a long time, but
it's good, it's quality.
When people in the West think this is some conflict that's happening in some place that we probably couldn't find on a map, that has no impact on our lives, this is bigger than 9/11 in terms of the impact it's going to have on the world. This is going to change the international world order, and we are going to live with the consequences of this for decades to come.
Okay, you've raised so many issues that I want to talk about over the course of the show. Benedict, let me bring you in, and welcome, and nice to meet you. My question, that I'd initially scripted for you is, why is Putin doing this? So let me ask that question, but comment on what Konstantin has just said from your own perspective.
A lot of what Konstantin says is right. It's an incredibly complex issue. There are no black and white answers, as much as we like black and white answers, because it makes sort of everything good. NATO good, Russia bad, former USSR bad. It never really works that way. I mean, there are some justifications in what Putin has said about the expansion of NATO, the expansion of the European Union, the role that those places want to play. They go about expansion in a very different way to Russia, though. Very much Germany, the US, they concentrate more on culture, on economic ties, although, ironically, that is how Europe has managed to get itself into quite a tricky situation in terms of opposing Russia, because it is parts of Europe are very deeply financially wedded to Russia. And again, that's part of the Russian strategy that has perhaps been neglected. For a long time, we've looked at Russia as a sort of a backwards power, something that's regressing, going in a certain direction. We like to laugh at the size of its GDP. We like to laugh at the poor quality of its tanks and its armaments, and the fact that its army is large parts of it are conscripted. And we just sort of think, in much the same way as we used to laugh at countries like Italy. Oh, it's a bit of a joke. They've got their little dictator who likes to talk a lot, but ultimately they aren't what they were. As Konstantin said, this is the wake-up call that actually we no longer live in that post-Cold War era where you can look at Russia as a second or third-rate power. It's not that. It possesses military equipment that the West doesn't have, and that is a very large part of why the West is very keen not to engage.
Let me ask you another question. Sorry to cut you off, but you've brought up the subject that I wanted to talk about. I just wanted to add one thing to what you both have said, and that is, as a financial journalist, this is something I follow. For over a decade, Russia has been buying shed loads of gold. And its gold holdings, and now it must have had some kind of plan, de-dollarization, whatever it is. But that's a very interesting strategic thing that it's been doing in the background that we people who follow gold have followed. But I noticed you wrote about this on Twitter, Benedict, and you mentioned, Konstantin, the magnitude of this. It's 9/11 big, it's even bigger. What weapons does Russia have? And how prepared is it to use them? And I'll let you answer that first, Benedict.
It has, since 2018, 2019, it's developed two different types that we know of hypersonic missile. That is to say that they can go at minimum 5 times the speed of sound, They say upwards of 10. We don't know that for certain. But the key thing about this is they are missiles that are effectively, at the moment, impossible to defend against. And what can you mount on these missiles? Well, of course, you can put nuclear warheads on the top of them. So when people talk about things like no-fly zones, for example, how do you enforce a no-fly zone if your enemy can blow up your air bases, and worse than that, it can blow up your carrier groups?
What is the range of these?
Well, this is the issue. We don't exactly know. That's something, of course, that Russia has been quite keen to keep under wraps. But you can imagine that if you were going to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine, you would need carrier groups, certainly in the Mediterranean, if not in the Black Sea. They can certainly reach that, and probably in the Baltic, and you would imagine that they can probably reach that as well. We're not talking continental United States or anything like that, possibly, and also we shouldn't think about that sort of thing. That's not in the equation at all. And it's not in the equation because, let's be completely honest here, the United States, Britain, France, they're not going to invoke some sort of nuclear tit for tat with Russia over eastern Ukraine. They probably even wouldn't do it over the Baltics, actually. That would be a straightforward confrontation between those powers. So, as I've said on Twitter, actually, I don't think it's likely, because I think actually the Ukrainian defences would fold before we ever got to that point. But we actually shouldn't mentally rule out the possibility of weapons like that being deployed. Putin has used just about every weapon up to nuclear warheads in every sort of theatre that he's been in. People are talking today about thermobaric weapons being used in Syria. They've been used. Cluster bombs have been used. Chemical weapons. Why would he rule these out if the war was going against him?
OK, we've got 30 seconds until we go to the next section, Konstantin. I want to bring you back in very quickly. My question is, what do we do? Is Putin prepared to use these weapons?
Well, it depends what you want, Dominic. It depends what people in the West want.
Well, I think the answer to that is peace and prosperity and trade and all the rest of it.
Well, and rainbows and unicorns and all that wonderful stuff. Well, if you want peace, then just surrender and let Putin take over Eastern Europe. That's how you achieve peace. OK. And, I mean, we need to be very careful about what we say, but I guess, I mean, that's a pretty direct answer. Yeah. And if we go to war... Well, I'm not suggesting we go to war. What I'm suggesting is people realize the nature of the confrontation we're involved in. This is not a Saddam Hussein who's gassed the Kurds. This is a global conflagration that Vladimir Putin told the world is the start of the next Cold War, and we're going to have to act accordingly.
OK, well, thank you very much, gents, and some pretty profound stuff there. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. I'm Dominic Frisby. I'm standing in for Alastair. Lots more to come, including a look at the anti-war protests that are happening across Europe. We're going to take a break, but first, the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, but it will be windy out towards the west. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and we're likely to see a good deal of sunshine around. There will be some cloud, but it'll be dry throughout the afternoon. The southeast and East Anglia will also see plenty of sunshine this afternoon. The breeze, however, will take a slight edge off the temperatures. Across into Wales, and the wind will be more noticeable here, especially along the west coast. Away from the wind, though, it will be dry and bright. Northwestern England will also have a dry afternoon, but there's likely to be a little more cloud around. It'll be breezy along the coast with highs of 9 or 10 Celsius. Over towards the northeast, and we'll see a mix of cloud and sunny spells throughout the afternoon. It'll remain dry through, with highs reaching low double figures. Moving into Scotland, and for many here, it will be a cloudy afternoon with some patchy rain. Winds will be strong towards the west, with gales possible here. Northern Ireland will also have a rather cloudy afternoon, but here it will be dry with the best of any brightness, perhaps towards the west. Top temperatures 8 to 10 Celsius. Heading into this evening, and we'll see little change, with most places dry but turning chilly in the south. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs.
sometimes big hair.
This is Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 12:24. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. I'm Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair today, who is taking some, no doubt, well-deserved time off. And all of our focus is, of course, on events as they unfold in Ukraine. Now, across Europe, there are street protests taking place, citizens trying to make their opposition to the war felt. And joining us from the streets of Germany is Ina Neles, the former CEO of United Action in Ukraine, Ukraine's largest political NGO fighting for reforms in post-Maidan Ukraine. She has family in Kyiv. Ina, what is going on? Where are you?
Hello, greetings from the peaceful streets of Düsseldorf. I'm in Germany. I was evacuated here 1 week ago to the motherland of my husband. And it's very strange here because I see a peaceful blue sky above, and the same peaceful blue sky is in Kyiv, but with bombs. And my parents cannot see it because they are sitting now in a bomb shelter, the same as my friends across the whole country.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you very much. And are you able to speak to your parents? Is there any internet connection? Are phones working?
Thanks God, yes. Thanks God, yes. And Ukrainian authorities said that they will.
OK, we've lost Ina there. So coming back to the panel, you heard her comments. It sounds pretty grim if you're in the Ukraine at the moment. You mentioned, Konstantin, at the end of the last part, the way to achieve peace is to roll over and let Russia have the Ukraine. But if
that's
that
the easy
happens,
way.
Yeah, but then if we do that, then it wants Romania. Then it, you know, where does it go from there?
Well, Dominic, I'm not saying anything new. Human beings have known this for thousands of years. Si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, you must be strong. You must prepare for war. And, you know, my heart goes out to you. I have family all over Ukraine who are in a very similar position. But I'm afraid talking about how there's a humanitarian disaster in Ukraine isn't going to change anyone's minds in the West, because what we care about is our own interest in globally. And the point I'm trying to make to people in the West is this is about you. This is about you and your children's future and this country and what we're going to have, because this is about Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping of China challenging Western dominance and saying, you've been the top dog for a long time. Well, now you're weak. Now you're distracted. Now you spend more time talking about Jimmy Carr made this joke and we now need to spend a week banging on about this, or can people change their sex, or any of this stuff. You're weak now. We're going to come and take over, and we're going to take that position if we possibly can. So this expansion isn't about Ukraine. It's about the West being distracted, being weak. And as long as that continues, you're going to see other people making moves, the Chinese making moves in Taiwan and elsewhere. This will carry on until the West decides that it needs to make a stand.
OK, very good. Benedict, you know, there's not a lot an ordinary citizen can do, but I guess ordinary citizens are doing what they can by taking to the streets. I mean, I doubt Vladimir Putin cares, but at least, you know, people are making their voices
Yes. I suppose one of the things that you can do and hope for is that enough sort of popular protests across the world, not just the West, because actually the West, as Konstantin says, it's not actually enough. It does need a sort of a global response by people to put pressure on their own politicians to cut ties with Russia. Now, that won't necessarily do anything, but what you might end up doing is applying the pressure on the Russian people. And, as much as we like to think of Putin as being this very sort of omnipotent person, and he's a very nasty character and very difficult to unseat, this war is existential for him. If it doesn't go well, there is nothing to say that other equally ambitious people in the top brass in Russia, in the military, in the government, people even like Sergei Lavrov, might decide actually this is not the man to take us forward anymore, that that we can depose him. So that is one way, but it is a very it's a very long it's a very long-winded way of doing it. It's certainly not guaranteed to get you any sort of results. But as you say, that's all that you really can do right now is put pressure on your own politicians to be stronger. Because, as Konstantin says, a lot of Western countries have become incredibly, I would say, lazy and self-indulgent. We do argue about things that fundamentally do not matter. All the while, we have conversations about awful apocalyptic things that are coming down the road. China is going to overtake the US economy. Climate change is coming. Vladimir Putin is going to invade Ukraine. A pandemic is overdue. All of these things we're told about, and we don't actually really prepare for them or really believe that they are going to happen until they're on our doorstep.
How popular is Putin in Russia? How much support in Russia does this war have?
Well, it's a very difficult question to answer because people confuse Russia with some sort of quasi-democracy. Like they think that opinion polls in Russia have the same weight that they do in the UK. Now, opinion polls in the UK don't have much weight anymore either. But, the Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu, he had a 93% approval rating the day before he was deposed and summarily executed. In authoritarian regimes, opinion polls are not predictive of how people feel. Having said that, people in Russia are supportive I would probably say, sort of half the country or maybe even more of Vladimir Putin, because what he has delivered for Russia is stability, is economic security, he's reduced the amount of crime that was happening, which was rampant throughout the country in the 1990s. He's ended the war in Chechnya. He's seen to be expanding the greatness of Russia, which this is something people in the West completely don't understand because we've lost that instinct ourselves. But in most of the rest of the world, the idea that you're going to take a piece of your neighbor's country and expand your land and territory and power, that's seen as a good thing.
Yeah.
Right. So he is seen by many people in Russia as having delivered economic prosperity, stability, and rebuilding Russia after a huge humiliation in 1991 with the Soviet Union.
Oh, that was humiliating.
Of course it was.
Okay.
And Vladimir Putin himself has called the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century.
I remember going to Cuba in 1993-94 at the height of the, with the boat crisis, the boat people and all of that. And we would read in the Western press how great, and I was a student at the time, we'd read how wonderful Cuba is and how socialism works and how Castro is popular. And you'd go to Cuba and everyone would go, yes, Castro's wonderful, wonderful. And then they'd sort of look around, check no one was looking, and come up to you and go, I hate Castro. And they sort of whisper the truth. Do you think something similar, Benedict, perhaps is going on in Russia? I mean, how much do the Russians even know about this war?
Well, actually, how much they know about it is, that's a very interesting question because, of course, a lot of state TV is very pro this and is only focusing on Donbass, on Luhansk and on Donetsk. But obviously, modern media is very good, social media is very good at sort of overcoming the barriers set by the state. Whenever we have conversations about, muting trolls in the UK, just kind of think, good luck with that, because actually it's very easy to permeate even the toughest sort of state backed media organisation. So stuff is beginning to filter through. But what I would say actually
how much internet?
Well, this is, Benedict, if I may interrupt, the one point I would make is the idea that some Russian grandma beyond the Urals is on social media, looking at Twitter, seeing what videos are being... Most people in Russia get their news from mainstream television, so that will tell you quite a lot about people, what they believe and what they think about the situation.
Although that will be different in major urban centres. Yes. That's always the case across different countries. But, of course, there's a very important point is that Russia is vast and very difficult to manage and very different... there are different ways of thinking in different parts of the country because of the infrastructure. But what I would say just very quickly frankly, is that people can become very fickle, not perhaps as fickle as the Romanians were under Ceausescu, but they can change very quickly. And we forget this because most of the world's population still lives a few paychecks away from food poverty. This is the thing that we don't talk about enough, and that is Russia's role in the global food supply chain. That's why you had Imran Khan in Moscow yesterday, kowtowing to Putin. That's why you have Modi not explicitly opposing Russia, and the same with China. They need the food because they know even their own populations could turn against them if that goes wrong.
Russia's got the grains. We'll come back to this in a moment, and as does Ukraine, by the way. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair. We're going to try and bring Inna back to you in the next part of the show if we can. But in the meantime, we are going to the news.
Dominic, thank you. It's 12:33 in the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian president says the country is controlling Kyiv, but has urged people to come and help fight. Britain's defence ministry reports the bulk of Russian forces are 19 miles away from the centre of the capital. Gunfire and explosions have been heard throughout the city, and fighting has broken out on the streets as Russia's invasion reaches its third day. NATO leaders, including the UK and US, have agreed to give more weapons, medical supplies and military aid to Ukraine. NATO are also deploying significantly more troops to Eastern Europe to bolster its defences. US President Joe Biden will provide up to £450 million to fund immediate aid and military training. A Russian cargo ship has been seized in the English Channel. French Sea Police seized the ship, which French authorities believe belongs to a Russian company suspected of violating trade sanctions linked to the war in Ukraine. The Russian embassy in France is seeking explanations from the authorities over the seizure. Facebook is banning Russian state media from advertising or monetising on its platform anywhere in the world amid its invasion of Ukraine. In response, Russian authorities announced a partial restriction of access to Facebook in the country. But Sir Nick Clegg, the Vice President of Global Affairs at Facebook's parent company Meta, says Russian citizens are using the company's apps to organise for action and encourage them to continue to make their voices heard. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Back now to Alistair Stewart and Friends in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 12:37. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, with me, Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair. Hundreds of people are demonstrating at the Ukrainian embassy in London. Many of them have family and friends in Ukraine and are fearing for their welfare as the unrest continues. And we cross live now there to our culture editor, Inaya Folarin Iman. Hello, Inaya. How are you doing? What's the feeling there?
Yeah, there is clearly strong feelings. There's several hundred people gathered here in Notting Hill in front of the embassy, and there's a very mixed response. I mean, it's been quite striking looking at many of the placards that are being shown. We've heard people saying Putin out, we've heard stop the war. We've also heard a lot of people actually having placards when it's putting pressure on the international community to actually remove Russia from the SWIFT banking system. That is an international banking system that enables money to move around internationally quite easily, and I think that increasingly people are putting pressure on that to be one of the ways in which diplomatically people go further. And I think speaking to some of the people there is just this sense that not enough is being done, that there is violence and bloodshed going on, but actually there does seem to be a kind of resistance from the international community to do more. And so the sense here is showing solidarity with the people of Ukraine, demonstrating against what is going on in Ukraine, but actually putting pressure, hopefully, for more to be done by the international community to put pressure on Russia to stop what it's doing.
Very good. Do you think the international community will listen? I mean, what sort of impact is this demonstration going to have?
Well, what has been very interesting is seeing the protests that are gathering across the world, and I think that oftentimes when we see these instances we talk of Russia as this monolithic entity, but there's been many brave people within Russia as well. There was a protest in St. Petersburg not too long ago by many young people protesting against what is going on. There's been protests in Oslo and other parts of the world, and I do think that when people do show in numbers, it does demonstrate that this is not something that many people support, regardless of if, for example, it might be said that Putin is doing it in order to bolster his strength domestically, but actually there are clear fractures within the Russian regime as well that many people do not support it. But there is seemingly very divergent views. On the one hand, people are saying that, for example, NATO has turned a blind eye or fell asleep at the wheel, but there's also people on the left and the right that are saying that NATO to some extent has expanded into that region as well, that has provoked Russia. So there doesn't seem to be a kind of coherent, cohesive international viewpoint about what is going on in that region. But all the people out here, as you can see behind me, they're singing, they're saying Putin out, they're saying many strong things in order to just show that actually they are ready to go out and show that they are against what is going on.
All right. Well, great stuff, Inaya. Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we'll hopefully be speaking to you again, I think, maybe later in the programme. That was our culture and social affairs editor, Inaya Folarin Iman, from the protests outside the Ukraine embassy. Now, Inaya mentioned there, gents, the SWIFT sanctions. Now, I was having dinner last night with a friend of mine who is high up in a major listed corporation that I won't say which company, but it sells a large amount of consumer products to people in countries around the world. And Russia is their biggest client. And Ukraine is, I think, their fifth biggest client. And he was saying, you know, if they bring in these SWIFT sanctions on Russia, this company is totally up the swanny. Now, you know, obviously you have a sort of list of priorities, and the welfare of one particular corporation is perhaps not as important as, you know, the invasion of a country, but nevertheless, when it's something as delicate as an economic measure like this, and corporations and individuals and livelihoods and so on suffer, it's not as, it's like you said, it's just not a black and white thing.
No, I do think it's a black and white thing entirely, Dominic. And the black and white decision I think people in the West really have to make is, are we willing to sacrifice anything at all for our values? Are we willing to sacrifice Russian gas supplies to Germany? Are we willing to sacrifice companies that do business with Russia? Are we willing to allow the City of London to stop dealing with billions and billions and billions of criminal proceeds from Russian oligarchs here in London through legal firms, through financial companies, through the property market, etc.? Are we willing to lay anything at all down on the line to prevent further Russian aggression? Or are we just going to allow this to carry on because we want to preserve our economic well-being or whatever else it might be?
All right, strong words, Konstantin. It's like listening to Winston Churchill in 1938, but elsewhere in the country...
Well, maybe people should have listened to Winston Churchill in 1938.
think they were. That was the point I was making, Constantine. I was just making light of it, perhaps inappropriately, but there we go. Elsewhere in the country, Wales First Minister Mark Drakeford says that Wales has a part to play in helping Ukrainian refugees who are attempting to escape for their lives. And we can cross now to our GB News Wales reporter Lily Hewitson. Lily, where are you in the world? I know you're in Wales, but which part? What's happening? What's going on?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm outside Penally this afternoon. Yes, as you said there, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, has given his full support to the people of Ukraine. He explained yesterday how he wants Wales to be a nation of sanctuary for refugees who have nowhere to go because of the Russian invasion. Now, on Thursday, the Senedd was illuminated in the colours of the Ukrainian flag in solidarity with the country. And in recent years, the Welsh Government has welcomed families from Syria and Afghanistan to Wales. Behind me, as I said, is the Penally camp, which was home to many asylum seekers before it was repurposed last March. And the First Minister has said that he'll do the same for those in need from Ukraine, as was done for the people from Syria and Afghanistan. There have been conversations between the Welsh Government and UK Government ministers about how the situation will force a wave of refugees across Europe, and local councils here have said they'll do all they can to support those who seek sanctuary in Wales. Andrew Morgan, the leader of the Welsh Local Government Association, has said a request for resettlement has not yet been received from the UK government, but councils here are experienced in helping resettle people from war-torn countries. Now, Mr Drakeford has supported the UK sanctions against Russia, but admitted that people in Wales will need to be prepared to make sacrifices, as people across the UK are more than likely to be affected by the ongoing situation.
Thank you very much. That was Lily Hewitson there, our GB News Wales reporter, bringing us up to date. Benedict, you heard that interview. I think the thing with the refugees is there's obviously, I think, 140,000 so far, something like that was a figure I heard. And a lot of them are going to neighbouring countries, Poland and so on. And I don't think they see it as permanent. They see it as a temporary thing while this resolves, and then they can go back. But maybe it's going to be... maybe that's...
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because a lot of people won't want to go back to Ukraine if it does fall back under the Russian sphere sort of permanently, especially if they fear repercussions because they've left all their political dissidents. But this is something else, actually, that we often have these conversations about refugees coming from... Most people don't want to leave their countries if they've been forced out by war. If they leave at some point for economic reasons, OK, fine. But actually, if they are forced out at the point of a gun, these are not people who are saying, hello, I want to come and clog up your NHS and your housing system. That's not what this is about at all. And it is, the basic response has to be to let them in, and has to be to sort of give them every dignity and every opportunity to, not necessarily rebuild new lives, but house them until such time as they can go back. I do think, a great deal of responsibility falls, at the moment it's falling on Poland and it's falling on other Eastern European countries. Slovakia has taken in a lot, the Czechs and the Hungarians, they'll take in a lot as well. In all of this, Germany, who opened its doors to Syrian refugees, surely having been, the most sort of intransigent amongst all the European countries about putting sanctions on Russia or taking any action against Russia, has to surely shoulder most of the burden. And Italy as well, actually, having given how the Italians have behaved in the last couple of days. And the UK, the UK actually will take in its fair share. You see mutterings saying, they've stopped accepting visas or anything like that. Well, they don't necessarily have to do it at the same speed as the Poles and the Slovaks do, because there's not that immediate border crisis. But I'm almost certain that we will end up taking up tens of thousands, because it would just be morally reprehensible not to.
OK, we are going to try and cross live to Ukrainian journalist OK, I'll come back to you, Konstantin. OK, back to you, Konstantin. You were flagging my attention there as Benedict was talking. I think you wanted to pick up on something he was saying.
Well, my heart is very much agrees with what Benedict is saying, but I think my head really disagrees very strongly. I think part of the reason we are where we are is that the West has become very divided, and one of the reasons is this constant churn. And he talks about Germany taking 1 million refugees. That affects your ability to take cohesive action if your country is constantly disrupted by large waves of migration. migration, where we don't even anymore feel like we're one country. We have an identity, we have values.
Well, hasn't Putin actually been sowing that division and dissension? Firstly, you know, he through his media channels, there's you know, the fake news, the fake bots.
Yeah,
sowing
I
division,
think it's a mistake to blame it on him.
I'm not blaming it on him. I'm saying he's happy for it to take place.
He's doing
and then
what
secondly,
he's supposed to be doing. He's accelerating these processes that we're doing ourselves.
The other thing he's been doing is, you know, importing refugees from the Middle East and sticking them on the Belarus border. So, you know, that suits Putin, and he's been.
But my point, all I'm saying is, look, people think I'm this massive critic of Vladimir Putin. I'm really not. In my mind, from his perspective, with the moral framework that most of the rest of the world operates under, he's doing exactly the right thing. As the West is distracted, as the West is divided, as we spend more and more time hating each other and thinking we're the most evil people in the history of the world, of course China and Russia are going to do everything they can to accelerate that process. We have to look at ourselves in this situation, because this, like I said before, is about us.
OK, we're going to try and cross live to Ukrainian journalist Mircea Barbu, who is in Ukraine. But first, let me play you the voice note that he sent us last night.
Hi, so I'm stuck in the train station in Mariupol. We were supposed to leave on the last evening train towards Kyiv in central Ukraine. It's a lot of women, children and old people just trying to get out of the city while they could, but we were stuck in the train station for 5 hours until someone from the railway company came and said we will probably have to spend the night here. And right now everyone's just locking themselves into their sleeping compartments. Windows are shut, blinds closed, and the electricity is cut off. There was a siren, an alarm just 15-20 minutes ago, and we've been getting informations that the Russian troops are entering the city as we speak. This is obviously unconfirmed information. I'm not able to actually go on the ground and check if that's the case. But it's going to be a very long night. So hopefully I'll have internet and phone coverage in the morning, and I'll be able to talk to you more.
OK, that was Mircea Barbu, stranded somewhere in the southeast of the Ukraine. We're going to try and get him on the line now if we can, but obviously we're slightly beholden to Ukrainian phone lines and internet connection and so on. I mean, it's pretty cold there at the moment. It's not a good time to be stranded in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. We hope he's OK. And this is the grim reality of war, I suppose. The refugees. You talk to a lot of soldiers, and they say that one of the most disturbing things they ever experienced in war, particularly in World War I, were the refugees, you know, the helpless, the innocent, and so on.
Well, it's why I do feel that European countries do have a duty to take people in. I'm not talking about men of fighting age or anything like that. By all accounts, not so many of them are coming over the border. A lot of them are staying behind to fight. And this, I think, is a very important distinction, because actually that's a good point about Afghan refugees, about Syrian refugees, Iraqi refugees. They come and, you know, there is the lack of social cohesion, and we're not prepared for them. Ukraine is none of those countries. Actually, you know, culturally, it itself, as we are seeing, is a far more united country than any of those countries were. It has a far stronger sense of identity and a far stronger desire to push back against the invasion that's coming. Whereas, you know, Saddam Hussein's army, you know, it put up a decent enough fight for a time, and then it evaporated. The Afghan army, it evaporated. You know, they aren't really, I think, comparable. And I don't think that you would have a situation of thousands and thousands of Ukrainians just going, well, I'm going to live a nice middle-class existence here in Germany. I think it would be much like in the Second World War, like Poles and Czechs fleeing to the UK, forming infantry divisions, forming, you know, squadrons, forming governments in exile, and thinking of ways to overthrow what's happening in their homeland.
And I do agree with that, Dominic. I do agree with that. A few thousand people who are going to be persecuted in Ukraine, of course they should come. My family are there. I understand that. I'm just saying, rather than focusing on things that make us feel good, we should be focusing on dealing with the problem that's creating the refugees.
OK, we're going to tackle more of this in just a moment. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair. Lots more coming up on the show this afternoon, including a look at how the sporting world has turned its back on Russia. We're going to take a break now, but first, it's the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, but it will be windy out towards the west. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and we're likely to see a good deal of sunshine around. There will be some cloud, but it'll be dry throughout the afternoon. The southeast and East Anglia will also see plenty of sunshine this afternoon. The breeze, however, will take a slight edge off the temperatures. Across into Wales, and the wind will be more noticeable here, especially along the west coast. Away from the wind, though, it will be dry and bright. Northwestern England will also have a dry afternoon, but there's likely to be a little more cloud around. It'll be breezy along the coast with highs of 9 or 10 Celsius. Over towards the northeast, and we'll see a mix of cloud and sunny spells throughout the afternoon. It'll remain dry through, with highs reaching low double figures. Moving into Scotland, and for many here, it will be a cloudy afternoon with some patchy rain. Winds will be strong towards the west, with gales possible here. Northern Ireland will also have a rather cloudy afternoon, but here it will be dry with the best of any brightness, perhaps towards the west. Top temperatures 8 to 10 Celsius. Heading into this evening, and we'll see little change, with most places dry but turning chilly in the south. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 12:56 precisely. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Dominic Frisby, in for Alastair Stewart on GB News. Now, the world of sport is turning against Russia. This season's UEFA Champions League final was moved from St. Petersburg to Paris, and the Russian Grand Prix was cancelled. With me now is sports journalist Ben Jacobs. Ben, tell us about the latest developments.
Yes, good afternoon. As you say, the Champions League final yesterday, following an emergency meeting, was stripped from St. Petersburg and moved to Paris's Stade de France. There was some talk that West Ham United were in the mix to stage that game, and the Russian Grand Prix has been cancelled as well, which is a different kind of policy to them we saw under Bernie Ecclestone when, for example, a race would take place in Bahrain a few years ago in the middle of a civil war. So what we're seeing is sport being morally and socially conscious and taking a stand against Russia and making it very clear that they are against, as federations, teams, clubs and individuals, the invasion of Ukraine. And then individuals have spoken out as well, particularly on Thursday night during the Europa League and the Conference League, when we saw a variety of protests from different players and teams. Interestingly, the Russian player Fedor Smolov was one of the first to speak out against the invasion of Ukraine, and several other Russian national team players have followed. And then we saw a number of other individuals, particularly some of the Ukrainian players like at Atlanta, Ruslan Malinovsky, who scored 2 goals and unveiled a T-shirt that said "No war in Ukraine." Real Betis were playing against Russian opposition in Zenit St. Petersburg, and they had a protest before the game as well. Manchester City's defender Alexander Zinchenko attended a vigil in Manchester and is likely to be involved in Manchester City's game against Everton at Goodison Park today, when there'll be more protests and messages and shows of solidarity towards Ukraine as well. So sport has really come together, but of course there's still more that can be done. In particular, the big question is, having moved the Champions League final, what will UEFA now do, and FIFA as well, regarding Russia's participation in both the Qatar World Cup and also the Women's Euros this summer in England?
Yeah, I gather Poland was supposed to be playing Russia in the World Cup qualifier next month. I think that's been cancelled. Is that right?
It has, yes. Robert Lewandowski, the captain of Poland, spoke out and said the game simply cannot be played, and it's, quote, the right decision for Poland to boycott that qualifying tournament. They're up against Russia, and depending on the permutations, the Czechs and the Swedes could also come up against Russia as well. And yesterday they stated that they were opposed to playing as well. It's a challenging situation, obviously, because if you've got a number of the Russian footballers coming out opposed to the war in Ukraine, but you need to take a stance, then you've got a bit of a paradox, because those playing don't want the war, but sport needs to be firm in saying that if Russia continue this offensive in Ukraine, they'll be punished in the sporting world, where they invest heavily. And the halfway house, if you like, is the kind of Olympic approach of not only staging games in neutral venues, which has already been stated by UEFA yesterday, but forcing the Russian flag to be removed. So at the Olympic Games recently in Beijing, much like in Tokyo for the Summer Olympics, it wasn't a Russian flag, it's an Olympic flag, and Russia revert to the Russian Olympic Committee. So there's some talk that maybe Russia will be able to continue in football at least, but only under a neutral flag. But then if sport's really to take a major stance, kicking Russia out of the Qatar World Cup should they qualify, maybe the qualifiers before, and the Women's Euros as well, would be a far more powerful message. And then, of course, Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, needs to make an individual stance as well. So removing the Champions League is the first step, a positive step and a powerful step. But let's not forget, he's still got his Order of Friendship medal given to him by Vladimir Putin. So perhaps individually, he should be setting the tone and returning that as well. The sanctions need to be powerful and clear and united from the world of sport. And I think the first sports federation, maybe football, maybe at the Paralympic Games even potentially, although athletes are still likely to compete there, but whichever sports federation goes first by kicking Russia out completely will not only send that powerful message, but will set the precedent for other sports to follow.
Yeah, I think they've got to do that. Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News with me, Dominic Frisby, in for Alastair. Plenty more to come. Do stay with us as we continue to update you on the Ukraine. But now we are going to the news.
Good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian president says the country is controlling Kyiv, but has urged people to come and help fight. Gunfire and explosions have been heard throughout the capital, and fighting has broken out on the streets as Russia's invasion reaches its third day. Britain's Defence Ministry reports the bulk of Russian forces are 19 miles away from the centre of the city. In a social media post, President Volodymyr Zelensky has reassured Ukrainians that he would not be leaving Kyiv, saying the fight is here.
Lately, there has been a lot of fake information online that I am calling on our army to lay down arms and to evacuate. Listen, I am here. We will not lay down the weapons. We will defend our state, because our weapon is our truth. And the truth is that this is our land, our country, our children. And we will defend all of that.
NATO leaders, including the UK and US, have agreed to give more weapons, medical supplies and military aid to Ukraine. NATO are also deploying significantly more troops to Eastern Europe to bolster its defences. US President Joe Biden will provide up to £450 million to fund immediate aid and military training. Labour MP Stephen Kinnock told GB News that if Russia attacks a NATO member country, that will be an attack on all of NATO.
So much as considered putting a single military boot on the ground into any of those NATO countries, then the consequences for him will be swift and they will be catastrophic. And that is what I think we have to make absolutely clear to him now, whilst doing everything we can to arm the resistance in Ukraine so that we stand with our friends and partners and allies against this tyrant and gangster that Mr. Putin really is.
The UN Refugee Agency says more than 120,000 Ukrainian refugees have fled the country since Russia began its invasion. Oz Chatterjee is a conflict journalist who is currently in Kyiv. He told GB News that Europe doesn't quite realise the scale of the humanitarian crisis the invasion has caused.
There's very little choice many of the people have here. Currently, many of them are staying in underground stations, using them as bomb shelters. And understandably, a lot of people here are very scared.
Well, GB News' Anaya Falarin Iman is outside the Russian embassy in London, where protests in support of Ukraine are taking place.
We've heard people saying Putin out, we've heard stop the war. We've also heard a lot of people actually having placards when it's putting pressure on the international community to actually remove Russia from the SWIFT banking system. That is an international banking system that enables money to move around internationally quite easily. And I think that increasingly people are putting pressure on that to be one of the ways in which diplomatically people go further. And I think speaking to some of the people there is just this sense that not enough is being done, that there is violence and bloodshed going on, but actually there does seem to be a kind of resistance from the international community to do more.
The UK, US, Canada and the European Union have announced plans to impose rare personal sanctions on President Vladimir Putin and his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. At a resolution meeting in New York last night, the United Nations Security Council failed to pass a motion that will call on Moscow to cease fire and withdraw its troops because it was vetoed by Russia. China, India and the United Arab Emirates abstained from the vote. A Russian cargo ship has been seized in the English Channel. French Sea Police seized the ship, which authorities believe belongs to a Russian company suspected of violating trade sanctions linked to the war in Ukraine. The Russian embassy in France is seeking explanations from the French authorities over the seizure. To other news now, British Airways has tweeted that it has fixed its technology outrage that's caused major flight disruption today. The airline has had to cancel a large number of flights, including all short-haul flights from Heathrow, up until midday, and that was down to significant technical issues. BA's website and app were down for hours yesterday evening, so passengers were unable to check in or book new flights. It's their second outage in 10 days. This is GB News. We'll, of course, bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get straight back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Thank you, Tamsin. I'm Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair Stewart. Until 2 p.m, I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come, we'll be continuing our coverage on the Ukraine invasion and bringing you all the latest news as it happens. Is the way to hit Putin the hardest by his pockets? I'll be talking Russian money and the latest sanctions, as well as so-called dirty money with a top financier. And I'll be joined by a Russian exile and former worker for the Kremlin about his take on things later on the show. GB News is all about you, our viewers. Any burning questions or stories you think we need to cover, no matter how big or small, we want to hear them. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let me hand you over now to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor.
Good afternoon, Dominic. Yes, in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, this afternoon, as we now enter the mid-afternoon period in that city. There is still sporadic gunfire and the sound of explosions that can be heard from time to time, but it's a lot calmer than it was overnight when there was quite fierce fighting in a number of areas around the capital. The British Ministry of Defence and the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, have said that the main bulk of the Russian armoured column has not reached Kyiv proper. It's still about 20 miles or so away from the city centre. And what we were hearing in terms of those clashes overnight were Russian special forces and paratroopers in the city centre, or certainly in parts of the city. There were also explosions that were heard overnight. An apartment block, a 20-storey apartment block, was hit by a missile. The Ukrainians said that that was a Russian missile. For their part, the Russians denied that, claiming it was an air defence missile from the Ukrainian armed forces that had somehow gone astray. So this is much, as you well know, an information war as it is an actual horrific battle on the ground in so many parts of this country, and all of the time the death toll continues to rise. The latest information we got from the Ukrainian government was that there were 200 civilians that had been killed in various parts of the country. For their part, they claim that the Ukrainian military has killed some 3,500 Russian soldiers during their attempts to advance on Ukraine. We've been unable, of course, to verify those initial reports. We can only attribute them to either side. It was interesting to listen to James Heappey a little earlier today, though, as he was talking about the speed of the Russian advance, or perhaps the lack of it, the fact that some of those key day one objectives had not been met by Vladimir Putin's armed forces. Having said that, though, it is clear with the might of the Russian military that they have made some significant gains as well. Hundreds of targets, critical national infrastructure, as well as Ukrainian armed forces, in particular air defences, have been attacked and taken out by the Russian military. So everybody watches to see what the next move is from Vladimir Putin's armed forces. The British military and NATO allies, for their part, well, they're not going to be putting boots on the ground in Ukraine, but they have said that they're determined to help in whatever way they can in terms of an enhanced effort to try to get more in the way of lethal aid to Ukraine. How they will do that is uncertain. It's by far the most difficult of endeavours to try to get some of those weapons over the border, I'm sure, and they won't, quite obviously and understandably, go into details as to why they want to get those weapons into the country. So it's still, as I say this afternoon, a very fast-moving situation on the ground, Dominic.
OK, well, thank you very much, Mark. And we'll be hearing from you again all through the afternoon. We were listening to the sports journalist there, and we heard about some of the Russian players speaking out against the war. I don't know if you saw the video on social media doing the rounds of the tennis player saying, please, no war, after he won a big tennis match. Benedict, how much trouble are those sports players going to get into in Russia for speaking out against Putin like that?
Oh, how much trouble they're going to get in. I mean, this is a country that does detain thousands of people for just turning up to a protest, not for doing it in front of the whole world. Tricky because, if you are a specifically quite successful sports person, you can still be an asset to a regime. Even if you are speaking out, you still project a form of soft power. There is something to be said for that, and that might give them an element of protection. Although, as we saw recently with the tennis player Peng Shuai in China, it's not actually a guarantee. If what you're saying is quite severe, and nothing gets more severe than a war, and saying that we shouldn't be having a war.
OK, well, it takes some bravery to speak out, I can only imagine. Now, we are joined now by Alia Chandra, who is editor-in-chief of Ukrainian English language website, who is in Lviv. Alia, can you hear me? Tell me about the situation.
Hello, yeah. So just a sec, let me get in the view.
You're nicely centred there. Where are you?
I am in Lviv right now. My family and I left because basically we're going to be a liability to the Ukrainian army if we stayed. So in order to work effectively, we moved to a place where the battles are not as intense. Of course, Kyiv is a very tense
Are
situation.
you staying with friends or family or?
Yeah, friends have allowed us to stay in their apartments.
I've got you.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us what the mood is. How are people feeling?
Well, here in Lviv, the mood is more calm, I would say. But of course, all over Ukraine, people are worried about what will come next. And especially in Kyiv, the situation is very tense because of the attacks, the missile attacks of the Russian army on apartment buildings, also on kindergartens, on a boarding house for children was also hit in the last 24 hours. So we're seeing that Russia is shelling civilian infrastructure, civilian objects, and for just a really insane idea in an unprovoked war. So of course people are very worried. They're getting into bomb shelters when the sirens sound, and it is just terrible. My life has been turned upside down in the course of 24 hours, and it is unthinkable that this is happening in the center of Europe today. So I would say that everybody is pretty tense. We don't know what the night will bring.
Was it known that this invasion was coming? I mean, how prepared was everyone? What kind of preparations were in place?
You know, well, U.S. intelligence, of course, warned for a long time that an invasion was imminent. But to be honest, in Ukraine, we did not really think that it was possible. Our experts did not warn of an invasion. They said that this was like a very improbable scenario. So this really just ludicrous statement of Vladimir Putin at 5 a.m. in the morning, a declaration of war, it came out of the blue. And I think that our army, it was prepared. It was prepared for all sorts of scenarios. Our foreign minister also said that they were preparing for all scenarios. But I don't think that many people thought that it would actually happen.
And
like this.
Is there quite a lot of anger with your authorities for not warning you so that people couldn't get preparations in place?
No, our authorities have been telling us to also prepare for all sorts of scenarios, to think about where the children and women would go, for instance, where to pack the most important things in a suitcase. Trainings for territorial defense battalions were ongoing for a long time. So it was clear that some sort of Russian aggression would launch, but like this full-scale war, it was just, it's really unthinkable. Yeah.
What's the situation with food supplies? Are there plenty of food supplies for the time being, or is there any kind of rationing in place?
No, well, as far as I know, there is no rationing. I think it depends on from locality to locality. I know that several supermarket chains have closed in Kyiv, and others have severely limited the time of their operation. I know that some places that are encircled by Russian troops, there may be some shortage of food and water, but that our authorities are working on this. But so far, no crucial shortage. Well, it's important to know that in Kyiv today, a curfew was imposed from 5 p.m. till 8 a.m. in the next morning. So starting from early evening, you could not go outside or you will be arrested as a member of a sabotage group. It's part of the authorities' ongoing plan to crack down on saboteur groups that are placing just marks for the Russian military to target civilian infrastructure. We have had our authorities warn those who live in apartment buildings to check the roofs for any markings, to check the roads for any strange symbols, and especially to report if there's any purple light coming, because the marks, they attack in the night. Missiles come in the night. It's like just in the middle. Every night there is an insane bombing. And it works like this, that there are these targets that the Russians aim for, and they're placed by these saboteurs, and they're lit up with this ultraviolet light. or there's a radio signal coming from these markings. And the Russians, they target specifically the civilian infrastructure and apartment buildings.
I mean, that's horrifying. I can only imagine the horror of seeing one of these targets on your house and knowing what's coming that night. It must be absolutely terrifying. Alia, thank you so much for talking to us. We wish you all the best. And it sounds like you are taking care, but all we can say is please take care. And I mean, it's a terrible expression, but stay safe. Thank you so much, Alia.
Thank you.
That was Alia Chandra, editor-in-chief of Ukrainian English website. Now, we can cross live next to Tatiana Kastanova, who is in Kyiv for us. Tatiana has been sheltering in an underground car park for a couple of days now. Tatiana, how are you? Can you hear me okay? How are you doing?
Yes, hi. We are kind of outside the parking right now to get better connection. So I can see sunny Kyiv, but very silent one. Yeah, we're good. We're good, thank you.
And how come you ended up in the car park? Did you have to evacuate your home?
Yeah, but basically it's a parking space, underground parking space that we have in our house, in our building. And every time we hear the siren, we need to go to the nearest bomb shelter. So this would be our parking, right?
I see. And are you hearing the sirens every night?
It's not like, it's only night or day. Yesterday, the day before yesterday, so we had quite a good night, I would say, without the sirens. The sirens started at 7 a.m. And after that, we went to the parking, and next one was at 9 a.m., 11 a.m. So we kind of thought, okay, so probably we would stay in the parking lot for the evening and for the night. So yeah, we spent it there.
And is there fighting taking place in the day, or is it just at night?
I don't really know, because we just get some news from Kyiv that sometimes something is around, sometimes it's on the different region of Kyiv, because there are some Russian structures that try to destabilize, the situation. So we just follow the news, but there is nothing next to us. But in some region, yes, and there are some civilian houses that were damaged. And we know the places, we know people who live nearby, and it's all kind of scary, nervous, stressful.
And tell us roughly what percentage of Kyiv has left Kyiv, would you say?
Oh, sorry, I don't have this information. I can say that in our buildings we have a few families, I would say, a few, yeah. Some of them with children, we just see them with us every siren.
Yeah.
And there are some families with children. There is one pregnant woman who is not planning to give birth before she's due to.
I can only imagine. And have you got plenty of food and water? What kind of help are you looking for from the West, would you say?
I would say that in Kyiv, we are fine. I mean, my group, but I know that my parents in Kharkiv, as they said, there's some problems in supermarkets because it's very difficult with the delivery. There is food, but there is no one to deliver it around the city because the drivers are scared. That's quite understandable. So in Kharkiv, I think there would be some problem with that. And some volunteers...
Are people hoarding food?
Oh, sorry. No, in Kyiv, definitely no. We went to supermarket yesterday. It was all fine. Yeah, maybe except big bottles of water. So we just bought a few.
Okay, and tell us finally, what are your plans for tonight? What are you doing tonight? We appear we've lost her. Well, we wish you all the very best, and thank you so much. Plenty more to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Dominic Frisby. After the break, we'll be continuing our coverage of the Ukraine invasion. But first, let's look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, but it will be windy out towards the west. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and we're likely to see a good deal of sunshine around. There will be some cloud, but it'll be dry throughout the afternoon. The southeast and East Anglia will also see plenty of sunshine this afternoon. The breeze, however, will take a slight edge off the temperatures. Across into Wales, and the wind will be more noticeable here, especially along the west coast. Away from the wind, though, it will be dry and bright. Northwestern England will also have a dry afternoon, but there's likely to be a little more cloud around. It'll be breezy along the coast with highs of 9 or 10 Celsius. Over towards the northeast, and we'll see a mix of cloud and sunny spells throughout the afternoon. It'll remain dry through, with highs reaching low double figures. Moving into Scotland, and for many here, it will be a cloudy afternoon with some patchy rain. Winds will be strong towards the west, with gales possible here. Northern Ireland will also have a rather cloudy afternoon, but here it will be dry with the best of any brightness, perhaps towards the west. Top temperatures 8 to 10 Celsius. Heading into this evening, and we'll see little change, with most places dry but turning chilly in the south. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 1:25, 13:25. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News with me, Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair. Right, we go now to our panellists today, my guests today, Benedict and Konstantin. What did you make of those two phone calls from on the ground in Ukraine? Not pleasant listening, exactly. Konstantin, what did you make of it all?
Well, this is what happens when there's a war. I mean, this is why, you know, you and I are good friends, but I was sort of miffed a little bit when at the beginning of the show you introduced this as the growing unrest in Ukraine. It's not unrest. There's a war going on, and I think we're now starting to see that. And I think and I hope people start to see that that is what's happening. There is a war going on, and it's going to have tragic consequences, as I say, not just for people in Ukraine, but this is going to have repercussions that expand beyond that region.
Very good. What did you make of it, Benedict?
I mean, the first thing, we often get this, don't we, in any sort of war, is that you do get a lot of stories of atrocities, usually by the aggressor. But I think it's important to recognise that, you know, at least sotto voce, this has always been considered an acceptable tactic in order to cow a population into submission. We all know what the West did in Fallujah, for example. You know, this must be, you know, put that the Russian forces themselves, they're not uniquely evil individual people, whatever you may think of their leadership. This is what happens in war. There are no good wars. No matter how clean you say that you can make it, there are always going to be people caught in the crossfire, and there will always be people who are targeted deliberately. You will also see, I'm sure, at some point, repercussions against Russian soldiers who have surrendered or Russians already living in Ukraine. I'm almost certain that that sort of thing will come out. this is the nature of conflict, and people will just, I'm afraid, might sound a bit harsh, you need to sort of gird yourself up for that, because if this is going to be a protracted conflict, you are going to see more and more atrocities and hear more and more people in desperate situations as we move forward.
Where does it end, Konstantin?
It depends on what the West does. It depends on what Ukrainians do. Ukrainians are fighting very bravely to defend their country. You will start to, and you know, Benedict and I are predicting these terrible tragedies, and I'm afraid there's nothing else that we can predict. But for example, you saw yesterday the Klitschko brothers announced that they are staying in the capital and they're going to join the fight. The leader of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, he's announced that he's staying in Kyiv. You know, I really hope that they are safe and that they are able to defend their country. But what happens if, let's say, you know, one of these Klitschko brothers is sadly killed in the fighting? How will the international community react then? Will it be that people suddenly start to realize what we're talking about, that this isn't a conflict on the other side of the world? This is a conflict, as one of your former earlier guests said, in the heart of Europe. And you're going to start to see very, very serious things happening very, very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, taking out the Klitschko brothers would be the ultimate scalp, wouldn't it, for the Russians?
It might, but it might also galvanize the international community, I think, as well. There's all sorts of... I hope it doesn't happen. I hope not another person loses their life in this tragic conflict. I'm just saying, from my perspective, the thing I've been trying to do over the last few days is to get people in the West to understand that this is going way beyond the conflict there, and there are going to be events, I'm afraid, that will continue to get people's attention here, and maybe at that point we'll start to take this seriously.
Yeah, I think it's something that's dawning on all of us pretty quickly. There's a sea change in the point of view. Right, we go now to our culture editor, Inaya Folarin Iman, who is outside the Russian embassy in London. Inaya, how's it going over there? Any change from before?
Yes, several hundred more people have joined the protest since we last spoke about an hour ago, and I've just been speaking to some of the protesters here. What's been quite striking, I spoke to a few Ukrainian individuals, and many of them expressed that they were surprised that Russia was going to take this road, and I do think there has been a shock and a disbelief over the last couple of weeks about the extent to which Russia will take these kinds of actions in order to bolster what it regards as its strategic interest. We also spoke to a Russian gentleman who was talking about the fact that despite what many people think, that there is this narrative, and we can still hear right behind me many of the shouting and the calls, and many drivers actually praising these protests. But on the point that I was making, I think there is a sense oftentimes in the UK that there is this kind of internal cohesion and consistency within Russia. But actually the gentleman was talking about the fact that a lot of that is even fragile, that there's a lot of propaganda. We don't have a diversity of media in Russia, and so it's often very difficult to get a sense of actually the extent to which Putin has support. And there are many Russians here who are opposing what's going on, who are standing up and showing solidarity with the Ukrainian people. So it is a somber mood, it's a sad mood. There's been a lot of tears, there's been a lot of singing, but there is a strong sense here that Ukrainians feel abandoned, they feel alone, and that they are being left to fight this war, this conflict on their own, when it wasn't just about their own individual ambitions as a nation, but wanting to be part of an international community. So I think that huge questions are now going to be raised going forward about what are the next steps. Is it militarily? Is it okay that we are, as you can still see behind me, you know, the mood is clearly getting more and more passionate, and I suspect as the day goes by, more people will come here, and more passion and emotion will be shown. But next steps now in terms of refugees, in terms of the possibility of military intervention, these are huge questions that are going to take significant thought, but there is a clear sense here that much more needs to be done, and much more, not enough right now is being done in order to prevent the increasing incursion and invasion on the part of Russia.
Okay, one of the things we've been talking about in the studio here, and one of the things that Konstantin and Benedict have been establishing, is the magnitude of this, the global implications. This is not some, you know, one-night event. This is as big as 9/11 in terms of the way it changes what's going on in the world. Are people there talking in the same terms of quite what a serious and big event this is?
Well, I have seen several placards of comparisons to many of the more horrendous figures that we have seen over in the 20th century. But I do think the kind of momentous situation that has happened and transpired over the last 2 weeks, it is significant. I mean, the conversation about the possibility of Western troops fighting Russia, this is really profoundly unprecedented. I mean, even during the Cold War, it was described as the Cold War because it never necessarily got hot in the same way. And we have seen comparisons with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Vladimir Putin has overtly made quite substantial, grotesque and frankly quite immoral threats on the part of him. So I do think there is a reconciliation happening increasingly that this is something quite game-changing, this is something quite significant, that Putin is more than willing to violate every norm within the supposedly rule-based order. And I do think that, for example, the exit from Afghanistan, which was widely regarded as disastrous, did signify an end really to liberal interventionism as a kind of a coherent ideology of Western society. But there hasn't been a sense of what the West's role wants to be going forward. And we know with the rise of China and Russia increasingly becoming close to China, that does tip the balance of power internationally in a very different system to which we've had over the last half a century or so. And I do think that only now are we really grappling with the implications of that. And many people have warned about this over the last few years. We had President Trump worrying about the Chinese involvement in our strategic infrastructure. We've had lots of discussions over the last few decades about Russian money, whether that's in property or in our financial system. But there's been this huge complacency. And now we're in a situation on the nth hour where we're seeing a war, a conflict in Europe. For the first time in a long time. I think that people are really waking up to the seriousness.
OK, Inaya, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And that was our culture and social affairs editor, Inaya Folarin-Iman, from the protests outside the Ukraine embassy and the Russian embassy. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Dominic Frisby, standing in for Alastair. In just a moment, I'll be joined by former Kremlin employee, now a Russian exile, Valery Morozov. But first, let's bring you up to date with the latest news. Here's Tamsin.
Dominic, thank you. It's 1:34. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Ukrainian president says 100,000 Russian soldiers have invaded Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky says the country is still controlling Kyiv, but urged the UN Security Council for political support. Gunfire and explosions have been heard throughout the capital, and fighting has broken out on the streets on Russia's third day of invasion. NATO leaders, including the UK and US, have agreed to give more weapons, medical supplies and military aid to Ukraine. NATO are also deploying significantly more troops to Eastern Europe to bolster its defences. US President Joe Biden will provide up to £450 million to fund immediate aid and military training. The UN Refugee Agency says more than 120,000 Ukrainian refugees have left the country since Russia began its invasion. The UN aid agency is also warning that fuel, cash and medical supplies are running low in parts of the country, which could drive up to 5 million people to flee abroad. A Russian cargo ship has been seized in the English Channel. French Sea Police seized the ship, which French authorities believe belongs to a Russian company suspected of violating trade sanctions linked to the war in Ukraine. The Russian embassy in France is seeking explanations from the French authorities over the seizure. In other news, British Airways has tweeted that it's fixed its technology outage that's caused major flight disruption today. The airline has had to cancel a large number of flights, including all short-haul flights from Heathrow up until midday, and that was down to significant technical issues, it says. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Back to Alastair Stewart and Friends in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 1:38. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, Dominic Frisby, in for Alastair. And our next guest is Bill Browder, who is founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, which was investment advisor to the largest foreign investment fund in Russia until 2005, when Bill was denied entry to the country and was declared a threat to national security as a result of his battle against corporate corruption. Bill heads up the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign and has authored many books on Russia, including the book Red Notice. And he joins me now. Bill, thank you for joining us. The first question I wanted to ask you, Russian dirty money, how much of it is there and where is it and what is its provenance? Are you able to answer that enormous question? It's throwing you in at the deep end a bit.
Well, it's an easy question to answer because there's a hell of a lot of it here in the UK. Over the last 20 years, the Russians have been taking dirty money out of Russia. When I say dirty money, money that's connected to fraud, crime, government corruption, and even murder. They take that money because they don't want to keep it in Russia because as easily as they stole it, it could be stolen from them. And so they bring it here to the UK. Why do they like the UK? Because as little property rights as they have in Russia, they're confident that it's secure here, that their money is safe as houses, if you will. And they also like it here because the law enforcement never asks any questions. Nobody says, where did that money come from? Is that dirty money or clean money? And even if someone asks a question, they know that no one will be prosecuted. And so this has become the haven, the world center for dirty Russian money over the last 20 years. And there's a lot of it, billions and billions. And you can even see it just with your own eyes walking past certain mansions and villas in Belgravia and so on and so forth.
How much, I mean, presumably there's none going to, for example, Germany and France, or very little?
No.
Is this,
no, there's money going to those places.
So why not Switzerland? Why not Cyprus? Why specifically the UK?
Well, I'm not saying it doesn't go to those places. It goes to those places as well. And so, for example, if you want to go to the front line and the Côte d'Azur between Nice and Monaco, you'll find 1 out of every 3 properties is owned by a Russian. Go to the Cala de Volpi in Sardinia and look at all the yachts. They're all owned by Russians. So it's everywhere. But the UK, they particularly like. The UK is a place where they like to live. They like to send their mistresses and wives to live, their children to public schools here. They send their parents when they're ill to Harley Street doctors. This is as Hong Kong is to China, London is to Russia, or has been for the last 20 years. And again, anyone who's spent any time in Knightsbridge will know what I'm talking about.
Now, if you look at Bitcoin use by country, the biggest user of Bitcoin is Russia. And I think Ukraine is actually fifth. How much use how big a role is cryptocurrencies going to play in this money laundering? And how big a role are they currently playing?
Well, it used to be that the Russians didn't need to use cryptocurrencies to launder money because they could send their money to Cyprus or to Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and then send that money from those places on to here. And I've personally been involved in investigating this and sharing information with law enforcement authorities in different countries. And so, but that whole scheme has been exposed, but through the Panama Papers and various other exposés, and has more or less been shut down. And so the Russians, they still generate an enormous amount of illicit finance, an enormous amount of dirty money from all their scams and crimes, and they have to get it out and safe to the West. And so those places get shut down. And what do? They look for other means. And so for a while, it was the art market. You know, art is like, you can't really trace it. And then the art market got shut down. And so now they're using cryptocurrencies. And it's no surprise that Russia is the #1 user of cryptocurrencies and so on because of that.
So as the law evolves, so does the money laundering practices. Bill Browder, I could talk to you for ages. So interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully we'll get you on to talk about this again soon. That was Bill Browder, CEO of Hermitage Capital Management. Now, joining us on the sofa, we have Valery Morozov. Valery is a political analyst. He used to work for the Kremlin and is now in exile. But I gather you fell into exile a long time ago. How did you end up in exile? And tell us the story as quickly as you can, Valery. I know it's a long one.
In the Soviet Union, I was the head of the analytical service of the Novosti press agency, which was responsible for the information warfare, let us put it like this, and abroad. Yeah. Then I was invited by the American corporation as the head of American corporation branch office, which was responsible in Moscow, which was responsible for the former Soviet Union. And this corporation was dealing in the field of construction and engineering systems. So from 1994-93, I started working in Kremlin. It was the first contract after the collapse of the Soviet Union to reconstruct Kremlin. It was the Grand Kremlin Palace. So, and then in I was done a lot of 60% of the market, and we had 60% of the market of air handling units and refrigeration equipment, chillers in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Ukraine.
So, but did Russia force you into exile, or did you go into exile
then
by choice?
In 1998, I left York International, now it is Johnson Controls, and set up my own company, and then I started working in the field of design and the reconstruction of the different properties and projects, including Grand Kremlin Palace and residence of the president, and so I've done about 32 contracts with the administration of the president, and then we started working on Olympic Games construction. There I had a conflict.
Okay.
Though I had always conflicts since 1994. I had first my conflict with corruption with the first 3 top officers of the president's security.
Okay.
But I managed at that time, and in 2009, the conflict was too dangerous. But though I worked and I was going on fighting for 2 years more, and even there was a decision of the president at that time, Medvedev and Putin, to start official criminal investigation against the authorities. Okay. But in 2012, I've decided to stay here.
Okay, I've got you. Now, what do you make of this invasion? What are your thoughts on it?
Actually, I think that that is the worst variant.
Yeah, I mean, I think you didn't think it would happen.
I thought that it may be 10% of the chance, because I was quite sure that they got some agreement on NATO, that Ukraine will not join NATO, and there will be some more peaceful way to do it through, say, for example, changing of the regime, new Maidan, and so forth. But the whole thing went the hardest way.
Okay, now we're in the worst 10% scenario. Where does it go from here? What happens next?
I think that within maybe 1-2 days after, or after Zelensky goes from Kyiv to Lviv or Lvov or to other city, say for example, there will be a new government, pro-Russian government installed in Kyiv, and then it depends on how much time will it take to take over the control of the whole Ukraine.
Okay, and then presumably that when you've dealt with Putin in Russia, how much, talking truthfully rather than polls and so on, how much of the support of the Russian people does he have? Is he a hero to the Russians, or are there a lot of people?
No, that is complicated thing. The majority of Russians, they are of course against the war. They don't want the war.
How aware are they of it?
No, everybody is aware. Okay. Everybody is discussing. The thing is that maybe 95% of population don't want the war, especially in Ukraine, because in Ukraine there are approximately 18 million people who are pro-Russian. Even from this point of view, they have a great chance to be killed or suffer. But in any case, most of the Russians, they're against radical nationalism, Ukrainian. And of course, 90% or 95%, they're against Ukraine becoming the part of NATO. And that's from that point of view, let us put it like this, that if Putin would allow NATO to go into Ukraine, he would be finished. Mm-hmm. So he had no chance to escape this. So that's why, I don't know the reasons why he went through this hard variant, but most of the, especially military-industrial complex. And he is the man who was brought in power by a military-industrial complex.
And do you think the imposition of sanctions, we're trying to wage war by sanctions, do you think it's going to have any effect?
There are different sanctions. American sanctions, let us put it more clever, they are not against, they will not have much impact on American economy or American interests. But they will be not very hard for Russia, because Russia has been prepared and Putin has prepared the economy and political and financial system. European sanctions, they are, frankly speaking, shocking, because they are more directed against interests of Europe. They will have very bad impact. I don't know. I think that there will be huge impact on the cost of living in the United Kingdom. I don't know. I think that 50% of English people will not be able to pay the costs simply, and I think that this is known to the Kremlin, and I think that is what they are trying. One of the aims of this campaign, of this war, let us put it like this, because they want to do the same what have been done to Ukraine. Ukraine has ruined its economy, mostly because of joining sanctions, anti-Russians, and all these things. So now it is the same. Europe, I know people, say, for example, living in Germany, how they speak now against Germans and Russians also, but how they speak about Olaf Scholz now. It was difficult to imagine a few days back.
How allied are Russia and China, would you say?
I think that is underestimated in the West completely. Actually, they have already alliance, and very strong alliance. The thing is that it is different from NATO. This is based on different principles. It is like an alliance of two civilizations.
Yeah.
And say, for example, if Russia is in war with NATO or the United States, China is not bound to join it. But it will not allow the West to win. In case there is a problem, China will join. The same is with Russia.
Yeah.
China, if gets in conflict in Taiwan, next Ukraine too, in Asia, and will get in conflict with the United States, Russia will not join will support directly military China unless China starts losing. But Putin will not allow China to lose.
I heard you nodding away there and murmuring.
At points, yeah.
Let's hear what you've got to say, particularly on this Russia-China thing.
Well, I've been making this point from the beginning, which is this isn't about Ukraine. This is about the geopolitical situation that we're now facing with these two other superpowers attempting to gain a foothold and expand their power and territory here. But if I may ask Valeria a question, what sanctions do you think the Europe should take to be effective?
I think first... No, I would prefer sanctions against corrupted officials. Though I will not agree with Browder because Putin long back told and ordered officials who are connected to him to go away from London, from the United States, and this has been done. The last was Abramovich, who closed down his last company on British Isles. And now he has only companies, Russian companies.
How tight are Abramovich and Putin?
Pardon?
How close are Abramovich and
Abramovich is, these are the people who called in Kremlin, they have nickname Purse. I actually had a problem because as they told me, the commanders of Kremlin, they told me, you don't want to be the purse, so you'll have the problems all the time. But they were very supportive. I had real friends there, and they supported me even during the conflict. I have told you that I was for 2 years and I managed to start the criminal investigation, and the order was from Putin and Medvedev. So they told not to touch my family and me personally, because I was not in conflict. I was actually simply protecting my company and my people.
Benedict, let me bring you back into the conversation here. What you've been listening to what's been said. What do you make of it?
I mean, I'm glad that Taiwan was mentioned because, as I said earlier in the show, we like to think about these things in the West. We like to talk about these portents of doom that are coming over the hill but aren't here yet, so we're not going to worry about it. Taiwan is going to happen. Let's be very clear about that, much like is happening in Ukraine.
There will be a statement.
Continue 1 second, Benedict. Just on your screen at the moment, you're seeing live footage from Poland, people attempting to cross the border there from the Ukraine into Poland. Anyway, back to you, Benedict.
Taiwan is going to happen. When that happens, you will see a massive ratcheting up of military activity in that region. You'll see the rearmament and probably the change in constitution of countries like Japan, which nobody wants, least of all China. But it's going to happen because they're not going to look at that and go, oh, but China has no interest in us. No, that will happen. That will see the reemergence of potentially another military power in the region. It will take time, but it's certainly a US avenue for exerting its power in the region. You might also see Russia, China, that relationship not being quite so nefarious, though, because, of course, there is a very close relationship between Beijing and Moscow. There is also a very close relationship between Moscow and New Delhi. And, of course, there is a bit of a fractious relationship between India and China along their border at the moment. But if you have Russia that has very sort of deep economic interests in both, and, of course, with India's other major rival, Pakistan, you potentially have a very powerful mediator in much the way that the US has tried to be the world's policeman. You might see an attempt to assert Russia on the world stage in that sense as well, to avert wars in the future.
OK, there's lots of hands being put up wanting to join in the conversation. Valery.
First, I would point out that Putin visited Delhi just before the war and all this crisis. This is one thing. The second thing...
By China?
Putin visited Delhi, India.
Sorry.
Second, before the war, the leader of Iran visited Moscow, and there were agreements. And there will be, I think, new military bases on Caspian Sea on the territory of Iran. And also oil and gas deposits will be developed by Russia. And then, what I just want to... Pakistan leader, 2 days back, was in Moscow.
Terrifying stuff. We've got about 20 seconds left, Konstantin. The final word is yours.
Well, I just wanted to make the point that Valery and Benedict both raised, which is that this is going to have an impact domestically as well. If you think about the impact on our thinking about energy security, no one wants to rely on Vladimir Putin for our ability to heat pensioners' homes here, right, or in Germany or elsewhere. So this is going to have a huge impact on the world domestically for us too.
I say, and that's all we've got time for, ladies and gents. Thank you very much for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow standing in for Alistair. Until then, cheerio.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking dry for many, but it will be windy out towards the west. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and we're likely to see a good deal of sunshine around. There will be some cloud, but it'll be dry throughout the afternoon. The southeast and East Anglia will also see plenty of sunshine this afternoon. The breeze, however, will take a slight edge off the temperatures. Across into Wales, and the wind will be more noticeable here, especially along the west coast. Away from the wind, though, it will be dry and bright. Northwestern England will also have a dry afternoon, but there's likely to be a little more cloud around. It'll be breezy along the coast with highs of 9 or 10 Celsius. Over towards the northeast, and we'll see a mix of cloud and sunny spells throughout the afternoon. It'll remain dry through, with highs reaching low double figures. Moving into Scotland, and for many here, it will be a cloudy afternoon with some patchy rain. Winds will be strong towards the west, with gales possible here. Northern Ireland will also have a rather cloudy afternoon, but here it will be dry with the best of any brightness, perhaps towards the west. Top temperatures 8 to 10 Celsius. Heading into this evening, and we'll see little change, with most places dry but turning chilly in the south. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.